Okay. I want to jump over and talk about something a little bit different, and that is default values in functions, aka default arguments or optional parameters. Now, in lots of our functions that we've used so far, our string methods and our functions, we've actually had some exposure to default arguments. We just haven't really paid close attention to them. Here's an example of that in a function, or not a function, but in a built-in string method that we've used before. So if I have a string like this and I want to print it out, let's say I want to center that, right? So I use the center method. Now, a required argument in that method is the length of the string that I want to embed that in. So I'm going to center that in a string of 40. And if I print that just as it is, it prints it in a string of 40 spaces, right? So that is, there's an optional or default argument at play here, because if I want, I can change that by adding a second argument inside here. If I want to change it to my name in the middle of 40 dashes, then I add the second argument. What that means is that this is optional. And what it also means is that when they created this method or this function, what they did was they set the argument for whatever character this is going to surround that. They set it to, it's a default to the space character. Now, which means I can give it an argument that overrides that default, or if I leave it off, then it uses the default argument. So the way I would do that here, here's a simple example of that. So I have a function here that I've defined. This is a custom function, define say, and it has two arguments. It has a message, and it has another argument called times. And what I've done with this is I've specified a default argument for that parameter. So times equals 1. So all this does is it takes the message and it prints it out that number of times. So now if I say hello and I only give it one argument, if this equals 1 wasn't here, I would have to give it a number, whether it's 1 or otherwise. But if I leave it off, now it has a default value. So if I don't say anything else, if all I do is say hello, then it will assume that I want it to be only one time. If I want it to say something more than one time, then I can give it that argument and it will override whatever's here. So it's a way of making your functions a little bit simpler, because what it does is it allows it to, most of the time, only have arguments that are necessary to supply. But it'll have something there. It has the ability to override that. So if I run this code, the first time it says hello, it says it one time. The second time it says world 5 times. Now if I change the default value, then this first time, when I just say hello with no arguments, it says it 2 times because that's the default value for that function. So this should give you some insight into not only how you can create default arguments, but also into why and how some of those default arguments work in functions that are built into Python. So what it does here is it just runs it 2 times. Now, if I wanted to do that vertically, I could put that times parameter somewhere else. I could say for x in range times. And now it'll print vertically, right? So hello, hello, and then world 5 times. Because now what I've done is I've used times in that range. But this is still a default argument. So if I have 1 there as a default, I could even default to 0. I'm not sure what the impact will be here other than not printing it at all. So it prints it 0 times. Why would I want a function like that? Well, I don't know. I probably wouldn't, but it's the simplest example I can think of for looking at default arguments. What's